Okay, we've got users brought in either through VMware Identity Manager or through LDAP or Active Directory. Active Directory? How about Active Directory that we've brought in natively through NSX? That's the way those words are all supposed to come out. Now we've got these users. What are we going to do with them? That's what this video is going to help you figure out, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about the different types of users because we have different types of users. What we can do with them, we'll talk about role-based access control. We'll talk about multi-tenancy a little bit. That's an interesting capability. We'll talk finally about assigning those roles. So in NSX, we have a few different types of users. We have local users. That's traditionally our admin user, but we also have an audit user that we have. And these accounts are local to the NSX manager. It's the only place they live is on the NSX manager. We have external users. Those are the users we're bringing in from Identity Manager. Those are the users we're bringing in from LDAP. And finally, we have principal identity users. Now, principal identity users, these are often used to give us kind of a similar functionality to like a service account that we might see elsewhere. We'll use these oftentimes in integration cases. We can see here that we've got some NSX application platform and maybe some NSX intelligence principal identities set up in this screenshot. And those are the types of things we often use principal identity users for, not for interactive logins or interactive work, but more for solution integration. So they're going to be there. You're probably not going to have to create too many of them. We also have a couple of guest users on NSX Manager. And these guest user 1 and guest user 2. These are both local users. They're local accounts. And I can go in and enable these. They're disabled by default. In other words, I cannot log in as guest user 1 or guest user 2 until I come in here and enable the account, set the password, all that kind of stuff, right? Naturally, I'm also going to need to set a permission or set a role to go with that guest user as well. But instead of using guest users, more often than not, we're going to assign roles to maybe LDAP or Identity Manager users that is going to, those roles are ultimately going to govern what that user is available to do. So we're going to work with that. Now, you and I are going to work with role-based access control primarily on named users through LDAP or VMware Identity Manager or something like that. But let's not forget that principal identity accounts, my local accounts, also have roles assigned to them. Right? The admin and the audit users, I can't change the roles, but they do have roles assigned. So what kind of roles do we have? Well, we've got this slide. We've got the next slide. These are both going to tell us, well, describe for us at least, kind of what each role is about. You can also go look in the NSX administration guide. There is a full rundown on all of the details of role-based access control and what each of these roles provides us. But for now, you may be interested in seeing what kinds of things we have available. You can always pause the video at any point to kind of stop and read what's on the screen. But these are all, these are some of the roles. And here are the rest of the roles. So we've got a number of predefined roles in NSX that provide us access to all kinds of different sets of administrative capability. But what happens when my needs don't fit the things that are predefined? Well, that's where custom role-based access control comes into play, because we can build our own roles in NSX to support the needs that we have that maybe VMware didn't think about precisely, or maybe we have everything you need. It's just spread across 2 roles, and you'd rather have those capabilities in 1 role. We can do custom role-based access control pretty easily. Now, I can either create a new role from scratch, which I don't advise, but we can, or I can clone an existing role. And this is probably what we want to do more often when we're creating a custom role. I'll take something that's close, and I'll clone that into a new role, and I'll edit the new role and change the few things that need to be changed, instead of building a role and setting up the entire permission structure from zero, from nothing. And either way I look at it, whether I'm creating a role, whether I'm editing a cloned role, I'm going to have a UI kind of like this, where I can see, these little badges for networking permissions and security permissions and these kinds of things. And it'll either say, full access or read only or mixed, if there's some mix in there. It'll give us some kind of really high level idea of what these permissions are. And if I click on any one of those badges, that'll bring us to the set permissions UI, where I have different tabs for all of those different sections. And then I can set kind of object by object inside of the permissions model what things I have that are read-only, and maybe I want some things where I want full access, and maybe I have some others where I just want execute access, and so on and so forth. So we can use this to go build our custom roles as fits our particular needs. Now, something new in NSX 4.0.1 is multi-tenancy. Now, this is a really, really interesting change, right? We have traditionally looked at multi-tenancy with NSX as something that was the responsibility of my cloud management platform to enforce. But as we're continuing to move forward, multi-tenancy is becoming more and more ingrained in each individual platform, and NSX is certainly no different than everything else. And so in NSX 4.0.1, we have extended what we call our data model, this is kind of our API structure and our object structure, to support multi-tenancy. Now, there's only one organization or org available at this point. That's my provider. And then inside that provider, that org, I can specify, I can build different projects. My projects would be approximate equivalents to my various tenants, right? So each tenant would get their own project. And in dealing with that, in thinking about that, now I have to think about think about new users and what objects go in which project and so on and so forth. My org admin, my infrastructure admin, is going to be the user that defines what projects or tenants exist, will, create or assign objects to the tenants. And then my tenant admins, my project admins, as they're officially called, they're going to be the ones dealing with things that have been allocated to a project, right? So, this tier 1 gateway, that's allocated to project 2. Well, the project 2 admin is going to be the admin responsible for manipulating that tier 1 gateway that's been assigned there. So we have this new permissions model, but if you don't actively use it, you're not going to see any of this. You're not going to notice any of this. All of this role-based access control, all of this object-based and multi-tenant access control, this is all used by way of the API, right? So I've got to get my favorite API client out, whatever that happens to be, and set this all up through the API. There are no GUI artifacts for multi-tenancy as things stand today here in NSX 4.0.1. Now, if I kind of lean back out a little bit, I don't have to worry all the time about multi-tenancy. And in many cases, maybe I won't have to worry about it at all. But understand that it's there, and you can configure it through the API. What about the rest of my users? What about all the other users that I might have? Well, the other users I might have, I'm going to be creating those and assigning, or not creating the users. I'm going to be consuming those users and assigning NSX roles in the user role assignment UI under user management. And that's going to allow me to choose whether I'm going to add an LDAP user or an identity manager user. They're going to be separate here. So I have to choose one of them and ultimately define what role or roles that user is going to have associated with them. All right, it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward when it all comes down to it. I choose a user and I assign one or more roles and I save and I go on and do it again. Speaking of doing it again, let's jump into the lab and work with this. We're going to set up an LDAP identity source, an Active Directory identity source, and assign an LDAP server to that and test, right? We're actually going to import a couple of users and create, a custom role, use a predefined role, and kind of see some things going on there. So this is a pretty straightforward lab. It's kind of fun, but it is all about permissions. And well, permissions are what permissions are. We're going to see them in action. Come back after the lab. We'll go ahead and wrap this series up. All right. That was role-based access control, right? There's not a whole lot to it. There's really, really not. It's pretty simple, I think, at least mechanically so. So, we talked about the different types of users. We talked about multi-tenancy, which we really didn't play with a whole lot in the lab. We talked about assigning roles and creating custom roles, and we did some of that. That's really neat stuff, right? All in all, we've got two different external user bases that we can draw from, right? Either Identity Manager or LDAP. And Identity Manager actually opens us up to a great number of flexible options, including, non-LDAP based directories like Radius or, multi-factor authentication or smart cards or things like that, where LDAP really provides us a more simple way of bringing external users into NSX. And then we've got role-based access control to deal with all those users, right? Who needs to log into NSX and what do they need to be able to do? That's what we're defining there. So that, my friends, is role-based access control. Come back in the next series of videos. We'll talk a little bit about NSX Federation. We'll see you there.